Hello. Yeah. We're gonna go on a mission right now. So will you come with me?
Oh, you will.
I was just a kid the first time I saw 10 Things I Hate About You. I remember thinking when I got older I wanted to be exactly like Patrick Verona. A bit of an outsider, but not in the weird way I seemed to be doing it at the time. In the cool, mysterious way Patrick was, with his great hair and his mischievous grin. When I got older and ultimately just continued to be the weirdo outsider I was destined to be, there was some ease and comfort knowing that most actors playing high school kids in movies and on television were generally played by people in their late 20s to mid 30s. Which meant I had some time to grow into my cool, mysterious Patrick-like persona. That ease and comfort, however, was stripped away when I discovered that Heath Ledger was only 19 years old during the filming of 10 Things I Hate About You in the summer of 1998, and had barely turned 20 when it was released the following year in 1999. Most actors need an additional 10 or so years of life experience to play that nuanced of a character, and usually require an abundance of previous acting experience to even pull it off. Meanwhile, Heath Ledger, who, outside of starring in a few television shows, hadn't performed that much leading up to 10 Things I Hate About You, although he did make claims that he'd technically been acting his whole life. In the role of Patrick Verona, Heath manages to take what easily could have been a generic teenage rom-com and helps turn it into what it was intended to be, a memorable, modernized rendition of The Taming of the Shrew, originally created by a small, lesser-known playwright from the 16th and 17th century by the name of William Shakespeare. Now, I know many are probably like, but Ian, who even is Shakespeare? Well, to you I say, you're a fool. But we ain't worrying about that right now, because today we're here to explore the life of someone who was bigger than the world had room for. Heath Ledger.
It's really interesting. If you want to go somewhere on your bike, you can't push on both pedals, you know, you got to push and pull in all areas. It's interesting.
Let's go back before Heath scored the role in 10 Things I Hate About You. Back to where it all started. Heathcliff Andrew Ledger was born on Wednesday, April 4th, 1979 in the city of Perth, located in Western Australia. His father was Kim Ledger, a race car driving mining engineer, and his mother was Sally Ramshaw, a French teacher. Heath grew up between an older sister and two younger half-sisters, his oldest sister being a huge influence on him to pursue acting due to her past experience as an actress and later becoming a publicist. Heath grew up playing chess at a fairly competitive level, something he continued to play on a near daily basis throughout the remainder of his life. It was something that he was so passionate about that later in his life he had plans for his feature-length directorial debut to be an adaptation of the novel by Walter Tevis, The Queen's Gambit, with Alan Scott handling the writing and production for the adaptation, and was supposed to star Elliot Page as the leading drug-addicted child prodigy. As a side note, 13 or so years later, after the initial plans for Heath Ledger's adaptation, in the year 2020, Alan Scott was able to bring The Queen's Gambit to life with a few changes, one of which was that instead of the adaptation being a film, it was turned into a Netflix miniseries that was directed by Scott Frank, who previously wrote the screenplay for the film Logan and directed the incredibly underrated Netflix miniseries Godless. And instead of Elliot Page, it stars Anya Taylor-Joy as the lead. Now, if Heath's love for chess helped develop his mind, then his athleticism and artistic interests endured growth when it came to his body and spirit. In elementary school, Heath had taken a visual arts class that sparked his interest in mixed media, painting, and cameras, setting the stage for his growing interest in music, theater, and later acting. His physical pursuits included field hockey, surfing, skating, horseback riding, and a dash of modern dancing. The modern dancing contributed heavily to his abilities to control his body movements while moving on stage once he started performing in his high school theater. At around the age of 16, Heath decided school was out, as he already knew exactly what he wanted to do with himself, and finished his high school exit exams early. Shortly after finishing the exit exams, he packed his bag and left for Sydney with his childhood best friend Trevor DiCarlo. The two of them didn't have more than 2 pennies to rub together, but Heath was determined that Sydney was where he needed to be to get the acting gigs he was aiming for. Prior to leaving for Sydney, Ledger had a small role in a short-lived television show called Ship to Shore, in which he played a cyclist who rode in a competition against the main character characters in the show. He actually rode his bike so well in Ship to Shore that a few years later, when he was looking for work in Sydney, the showrunners of another short-lived TV show, Sweat, offered him the option to either reprise his role as a cyclist or take on a new role as a swimmer. The thing that differentiated the cyclist role in Sweat from the cyclist role in Ship to Shore was that the cyclist in Sweat not only had lines of dialogue, as in Ship to Shore Heath Ledger never actually spoke, but the character was gay. Ledger later said that he chose the gay cyclist over the swimmer role because he knew that in order to break out, he needed to be willing to take on more challenging roles. And so, for 26 episodes, Heath Ledger did exactly that, playing Snowy Bowles in the show Sweat. It's worth acknowledging just how progressive Heath's views were in 1996 at only 17 years old when he played the role in Sweat. For many today, his decision might seem like a no-brainer and not that big of a deal, but at that age and in that era, most high-level actors weren't even taking on roles like this one due to the risk of public scrutiny. That forward-thinking and willingness to endure a challenge by Ledger obviously contributed deeply to his outlook on the world and the art he made going forward. In 1997, Heath got busy, hammering out a variety of different projects, from a small role in a darker themed Point Break style film Black Rock to a slightly more wholesome and younger audience-oriented film involving a talking dog named Paws, along with 2 television series, 10 episodes in an Australian soap opera by the name of Home and Away, which is still on today, and the single-season show Roar, in which Heath starred as Connor, a young Celtic chieftain in 5th century Ireland. For a kid who hadn't even aged out of his teens yet, Heath Ledger now had an incredible resume. The amount of acting experience he'd acquired and the range he'd shown thus far meant he could easily have landed a long-time role on an Australian television show, or starred in almost any Australian film he wanted. But much like the intuition he had about needing to leave Perth for Sydney, if he wanted to elevate his acting career, he knew it was time to leave Sydney for Los Angeles. So in 1998, at only 19 years old, Heath Ledger moved from Sydney to LA, and within his first year of being there, he landed the role that would change everything: 10 Things I Hate About You. And we've come full circle, back to the beginning of this little video of ours. Earlier I mentioned that most other actors would likely need an additional 10 years of life and acting experience to pull off the performance Heath Ledger does in the reimagining of The Taming of the Shrew. But seeing his filmography up to this point and the length he was willing to go to make those roles happen, it's easy to see where he was able to pull from to play Patrick Verona in 10 Things I Hate About You. Heath starred in an Australian film called Two Hands, directed by Gregor Jordan, that was released 4 months after 10 Things I Hate About You. And while it didn't necessarily have the same blockbuster success that 10 Things had, it initiated a relationship between the director and Ledger that would reunite them in 2003 for the film Ned Kelly. The relationship building between director and actor isn't super uncommon. Some examples can be seen with Judd Apatow and Seth Rogen, or Quentin Tarantino and Samuel L. Jackson, or Scorsese and De Niro, or Adam Sandler and his 400 friends. But it's usually indicative of people who like working with one another and their shared interest in bringing an idea to life on screen. And for Heath, in less than 10 years between Two Hands and his final film, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, he managed to establish a relationship like this with 3 different directors, collaborating with Gregor Jordan on Two Hands in 1999 and Ned Kelly in 2003, with Brian Helgeland in the cult classic A Knight's Tale in 2001 and again on The Order in 2003, and finally with Terry Gilliam on The Brothers Grimm in 2005 and The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, which ended up being released in 2009. Beyond Heath's likability, his willingness to dedicate so much to the craft and characters he played is what likely led to so many directors expressing interest in wanting to work with him again. Ironically, Heath's dedication nearly led him to never get an acting role again. After the incredible success of 10 Things I Hate About You, almost every role that was pitched his direction involved being another heartthrob, and Heath decided that he would turn down any role that came his way resembling such. Well, as it turns out, studios don't like being told no when offering up roles in their films. Nevertheless, for the next year, the now 20-year-old Heath Ledger dealt with a few new challenges. 1. Sticking to his guns on not being typecast. 2. Whether or not turning down all these roles was going to end with him never having a role to play again. And 3. The overwhelming celebrity that came along with 10 Things. Heath has said he loved the creative process that came along with acting, but the celebrity aspect was something he was not prepared for. He considered himself a fairly private person leading up to his success, and it just happened so quickly going from a nearly unknown to an A-lister that it was a tad bit overwhelming. But he managed to to survive these trials and tribs, Heath landed a role supporting Mel Gibson in the 2000 release of The Patriot, a role that Heath actually thought he was absolutely not going to get the call back for. During his initial audition, Heath was extremely nervous. Not working for a year, coupled with the fact that he was now standing in front of Mel Gibson, one of his lifelong idols, Heath fumbled around a bit before apologizing partway through the audition for wasting everyone's time and leaving before even finishing. But Mel Gibson liked him and pushed hard to have him take on the role of his son in the film, saying that he had the exact traits he wanted on screen. Gibson felt that Heath was young in appearance but had wisdom hidden behind his eyes, similar to how Gibson was when he was Heath's age. At the time, Mel Gibson was one of the largest stars in Hollywood, and to have a star like that going to bat for Heath says a lot. The relationship between the two of them would prove to be a fruitful one, Gibson becoming a mentor of sorts, helping Ledger navigate his newfound stardom and Hollywood celebrity lifestyle. A few months after filming finished on The Patriot, Heath was already on to the next project, A Knight's Tale. A Knight's Tale would end up being the first time Heath Ledger would essentially be carrying the entire burden of the film as the primary lead. Billboards everywhere would be covered with Heath's face, oddly in an almost identical way to the billboards from a year before that had Mel Gibson's face on them for The Patriot. Writer and director Brian Helgeland came up with a medieval action comedy that used a rock and roll soundtrack and the occasional modern pop culture themes and jokes to create A Knight's Tale. The film may have been a tad bit before its time, but in May of 2001, A Knight's Tale would become another cult classic that Heath Ledger was able to add to his resume. After A Knight's Tale, the ball starts rolling for Heath. He takes on the role of a Georgia boy named Sonny in the 2000 release of Monsters Ball, supporting Billy Bob Thornton and Halle Berry. Now, did you guys hear that part where I said the ball starts rolling, and then the next role he had was in Monsters Ball? Pretty good. Anyways, less than a year after playing a lighthearted medieval hero, Heath finds himself speaking in a southern accent as the boy of Billy Bob Thornton's character Hank, a racist prison guard. Sonny is hated by his father, and grappling with never being enough for his old man, struggles to find where he fits into things. Heath is in the film for less than half of its runtime and doesn't have much dialogue, but he's able to convey so much emotion during his on-screen time, it actually landed him the gig for Brokeback Mountain without even needing to audition for it. The director Ang Lee being quoted as saying, "I knew he was a good actor, particularly for Monsters Ball. He brings so much poetry to the role." After Monsters Ball, Heath transforms from a Georgia-based corrections officer into a British officer in the year 1875 in The Four Feathers. Oddly enough, while working on this, I recalled a deeply buried memory of my dad taking me to the movies to see The Four Feathers in theaters for my birthday, as it released around the same time. Probably not the best choice of film for a little boy celebrating his birthday, but I remember being so damn bored I thought I was going to bleed out of my eyeballs. The only thing that stood out to me at the time was how good Heath was and how stoked I was to see him working with Jimon Hansu, the guy from Gladiator who had starred alongside Russell Crowe a couple years prior. In the 4 short years since 10 Things I Hate About You, Ledger had starred in 5 films, each role quite different from the next. Heath was beginning to break free from the teen heartthrob typecast. Then, in 2003, Heath got to run it back, indulging in some of the great relationships he cultivated a few years prior, working again with Two Hands director Gregor Jordan on Ned Kelly, and A Knight's Tale director Brian Helgeland on The Order. Ned Kelly had a star-studded cast, including the legendary Naomi Watts, Orlando Bloom, who was at a career peak at the time. 2003 was in the midst of the Lord of the Rings series being released and around the same time as the first Pirates of the Caribbean, so to star alongside the famous Will Legolas Turner was a pretty big deal. Ned Kelly also starred Jeffrey Rush, who, oddly enough, would share the screen with Orlando Bloom just a few months later in that same first Pirates of the Caribbean film. Actually, a little fun fact about Pirates of the Caribbean, Orlando Bloom almost passed on the role because he didn't really want to play a pirate, but it was Jeffrey Rush who convinced him to join the cast, and they would not have met had it not been for making the film Ned Kelly together and establishing their relationship. So needless to say, Ned Kelly was a stacked cast. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to carry the film into anything resembling a success. It was heavily criticized as being uninteresting and difficult to get through, and suffered greatly at the box office. But hey, at least we got Pirates of the Caribbean out of it. Later that year, with the release of The Order, originally titled The Sin Eater, it seemed like a reuniting of the team from A Knight's Tale might see a better payoff, especially with the dark theme of a priest trying to investigate mysterious evil happenings in Rome, something folks seemed to enjoy in the later released 2005 film Constantine and book-turned-movie series Angels and Demons and the Da Vinci Code. It may have been a tad ahead of its time time, though, as The Order experienced a fate similar to that of Ned Kelly. Regardless, Heath Ledger continued to show his devotion to the craft. While both films' public perception might have been one of high levels of criticism, none of that criticism was directed at Heath. In fact, many reviews framed it as both films must have been impossible to salvage if even Heath Ledger couldn't save it. At 24, even when starring in box office flops, critics still seemed to be fond of Heath's performances. It would be hard not to. Heath was trying out so many different roles and it was frequently landing. From a soldier in the American Revolution to a jousting knight, a southern jailer to a 19th century British officer, an Irish accented Australian to a sin-eating priest. It looks like his escape from just being a heartthrob was a successful one. In 2004, no movies were released with Heath Ledger involved. Instead, he was hard at work, acting in not one, not two, but 4 projects that would end up being released in 2005. Lords of Dogtown, The Brothers Grimm, Casanova, and Brokeback Mountain. Technically, The Brothers Grimm was shot in 2003, but due to issues between the director Terry Gilliam and the infamous Weinstein brothers, you know the ones, its release date was pushed back by nearly 10 months. 3 of the 4 mentioned films made it into the 62nd Venice International Film Festival in 2005. Although Casanova was in the festival, it was not actually competing, but due to the director Lasse Hallström's previous successes like What's Eating Gilbert Grape, starring a young Leonardo DiCaprio and Johnny Depp, and Chocolat, which also starred Depp, Hallström was invited to showcase his newest film, which had Heath front and center, and just behind were 2 seasoned veterans, Jeremy Irons and Oliver Platt. Okay, super fast side quest. In Casanova, Jeremy Irons plays a character who is trying to take down Heath Ledger's character. Later, Jeremy Irons would play Alfred Pennyworth for Ben Affleck's Batman, and while technically that's a different DC universe than the one Heath would later play in as the Joker, it means Jeremy Irons has played at least 2 different characters that had it out for Heath Ledger. Now how many degrees of bacon is that one? Anywho, one of the Ledger films in the Venice Film Festival that was in competition was The Brothers Grimm, directed by Terry Gilliam, who would later work with Heath again on what would end up being his final role. In The Brothers Grimm, Heath stars alongside Matt Damon, who just crushed the box office in the previous year with 2 huge sequels, The Bourne Supremacy and Ocean's 12. The other Ledger project competing would be Brokeback Mountain, directed by Ang Lee, who had previously done Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and the excruciatingly underrated 2003 Hulk. Brokeback Mountain would also include Jake Gyllenhaal, Anne Hathaway, and Michelle Williams. Mark Wahlberg, the guy who previously played a drug-addicted porn star in the Paul Thomas Anderson film Boogie Nights, declined an offer from Ang Lee to star in the film because he was, quote, creeped out, end quote, by the script. Fortunately for all of us, the screenwriters Diana Osana and Larry McCurtry had Heath Ledger in mind after being impressed by his work in Monsters Ball, and had the casting director A.V. Kaufman reach out to him. Heath read it and thought it was beautifully written, immediately putting himself into the running. Jake Gyllenhaal had a similar reaction and shared the same level of enthusiasm for the script. Gyllenhaal also didn't want to miss out on the opportunity to work with Ang Lee and his homie Heath. From the beginning, Heath made it clear that he wanted to play the role of Ennis Del Mar. His reasoning was that Ennis was required to convey more with less, the character being a little less vocal and needing to show more of an internal emotional struggle on the screen when compared to Jack Twist. Heath's decision to tackle the role with so little hesitation speaks volume about his character as a person. Beyond the challenge of the role itself, there was no concern when it came to what might be said about him playing a gay cowboy. Then again, why would he? When 9 years prior, at only 17 years old, he'd already played a gay character in the Australian show Sweat. On the contrary, now more than then, there seemed to be quite a few reasons Heath Ledger might have passed on the role. Heath's early mentor, Mel Gibson, strongly advised him against taking the role, telling Ledger it would destroy his career. Heath sticking to his decision to be in Brokeback Mountain even led to a falling out between him and Gibson, something Gibson later says he deeply regret allowing to diminish their relationship. Since the film's release, Ang Lee has said that many actors expressed interest in the film at the time, but shied away because of potential backlash of playing a gay romantic role on screen, something Heath showed no shyness for. For some context, at the time, same-sex marriage was still more than 8 years away from even being legal in California, and more than 10 years away from being legal across the entire United States. Fortunately, times have changed, and Heath Ledger choosing to go forward with Brokeback Mountain has aged like fine wine, while those who were opposed akin to milk. The first show of success for Brokeback Mountain happened just after its premiere at the Venice Film Festival. By receiving the Golden Lion, the festival's highest award. The release of Brokeback Mountain did a lot to showcase Heath's acting skills. He'd completely disappeared into the character, but it also gave a chance to see his personality, really giving the world a moment to indulge in his view of it. An example being, during a Q&A, a reporter asked Ledger what his opinions were about people who thought the film was disgusting, and his response was this.
Oh. Well, I don't know. I think yeah, I think it's a real shame. Well, I think it's immature, for one, really immature. But I think it's an incredible shame that people go out of their way to discuss or to voice their disgust, I should say, or negative opinions about the way two people wish to love one another. I mean, come on. I mean, at least voice your opinions on how two people show hate and violence and anger towards each other. Isn't that more important? I think so. So, I don't know. And it doesn't really concern me. I think it's a shame. But I also feel that I also feel like it'll surprise people. It's not particularly a story. I mean, it's obviously about two men in love, and it's obviously gay themed, and it's very easily labeled. But unfortunately, people are very quick in life to label something that they're uncomfortable with. The pure fact of it is it transcends a label. It's human. It's a story of two human beings, two souls that are in love. It's like, get over the fact that there's two men. That's the point. The movie is not a story about an epidemic or a virus or something that can be cured in hospital. We're showing that love between two men is just as infectious and emotional and strong and pure as it is with heterosexual love. And if you can't understand that, then just don't go see the movie. It's okay. You know, we don't care. It's like, deal with it in your own private life. Don't voice it out, you know? It's like, we don't want to know, and it's really boring and old and whatever, you know? But we're very proud of it, and I think it's transcended that, you know? And so, you know, that.
Another example of Heath's personality coming through was during the Venice Film Festival. One interviewer felt Heath was acting as a bit of a diva, not really putting much energy into the interviews that were supposed to be promoting and showcasing his films. It wasn't too long after the initial observations, said interviewer realized Heath wasn't being a diva, he was just worn out from running between all the movie junkets representing the 3 films he was in during the 10 days of the festival. Heath Ledger worked hard and went to exhausting lengths to make his work the absolute best, regardless of public opinion, and after 2005, the world knew it. Before moving on, I do want to briefly mention Lords of Dogtown. It was also released in 2005, but didn't make the cut for the Venice Film Festi. It was a biographical drama that followed skate and surf culture in Santa Monica and Venice, California in the 70s. In Lords of Dogtown, Heath played Skip Engblom, the founder of Jeff Ho Surfboards and Zephyr Productions, and Z-Boy's sponsor. Surfers and skaters from that era said Heath's portrayal of Skip in the film was near identical to how they remembered Skip being back in the day. Even Skip was amazed at how eerily similar Heath's interpretation of himself was. Lords of Dogtown ended up being a cult classic in its own right, and some folks have said that even years after the release of it, details about the film might have been forgotten, but the one thing that remains crystal clear in their memory is Ledger's portrayal of Skip Engblom. After his 4-film saga in 2005, Heath Ledger would slow things down a bit with only one film coming out in 2006. In the film, titled Candy, Heath plays an artistic heroin addict who falls in love with a girl aptly named Candy. The story itself is in the same wheelhouse as, say, Requiem for a Dream or The Basketball Diaries, but an early scene in the movie once again showcases Heath's acting range and sets the tone for the direction the film is likely heading. Candy is a damn good film that tends to get greatly overlooked when it comes to Ledger's filmography. The plot is broken into 3 parts: heaven, earth, and hell, and Heath flexes just how naturally he can move his character between these stages, with what seems to be little to no effort. In 2006, Heath also filmed his scenes in the biographical film I'm Not There, about Bob Dylan, which would then be released in 2007. It was shot with a variety of actors playing different stages in Bob Dylan's life. Ledger acted as Bobby Boy during one of these stages of life, as did Richard Gere, Cate Blanchett, and soon-to-be co-star Christian Bale. But the release of a new film and getting to fill the shoes of Bob Dylan wasn't enough for Ledger. 2006 would also be the year he starts to more deeply explore his other artistic endeavors and expand beyond just acting. Heath was known for always having a camera on him and wanting to capture everything he could either on film or in a photo. After years of being in front of a camera professionally, he was ready to take his behind-the-camera hobby and turn it into a more professional one as well. Directing, combined with his love for music, led Ledger to direct 3 music videos in 2006. Cause and Effect by Nufa of 1200 Techniques, Seduction of Evil, She's Hot, also by Nufa, and Morning Yearning by Ben Harper. This would snowball into the beginning of the Masses Music, a visual arts collective and record label that Heath would co-found with his friends Matt Amato and Ben Harper in 2007. Creatively, he began expanding his directing skills by continuing to direct music videos, starting off 2007 with Black Eyed Dog by Nick Drake, a music video that when Heath completed it, he gave to Drake's estate later that year. Nick Drake was an acoustic guitar player and singer from the late 1960s and 70s. Nick's story was one that concluded far sooner than it should have when he was only 26 years old. Heath had a profound respect for him, and actually making this video led me down a side quest rabbit hole to explore the life of Nick Drake. I highly recommend exploring it yourself in the beautifully made video by YouTuber Volksgeist. I'll be sure to leave a link to his video, The Van Gogh of Music, The Story of Nick Drake, in the description down below, as well as a link you can click near the top right of the screen now. Heath had 2 more music videos he directed that would end up being released in 2009. Quicksand by Grace Woodruff, which was a David Bowie cover, and King Rat by Modest Mouse, which was completed later by the band down to the exact detail of what Ledger had originally intended for the music video. Under the Masses Music, Heath was directing and starting to sign artists onto the label. At one point, Alex Ebert of I'm a Robot started making music with another singer named Jade Castrinos that led to the creation of Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, who credit Heath Ledger and the Masses Music as providing seed money to even get Edward Sharpe off the ground. With a blooming record label and the rapidly developing director's skill set, Heath Ledger was really expanding his creative boundaries. And just around the corner waiting for him was a role that would expand his acting boundaries and solidify him as one of the greatest actors of all time. Around his 28th birthday in April of 2007, the filming of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight would begin. When it was discovered Heath Ledger would be playing the Joker in an upcoming Batman movie, the general public did not respond well. It resulted in an exorbitant amount of jokes online referring to his recent role in Brokeback Mountain and making callbacks to the teeny bopper guy from 10 Things I Hate About You, not really translating too well into a psychopathic killer that is the Joker. Even articles were written criticizing the choice made. Skepticism would be an understatement when it came to the reaction the public had for Heath Ledger to play the Joker. Very similar to how people reacted when first hearing Robert Pattinson, the guy from Twilight, would be playing the Batman. But other people's skepticism never seemed to slow Heath down before, and this time I don't think it even registered on his radar. The lengths that Heath Ledger went to develop his interpretation of the Joker were akin to the types of things an actor like Daniel Day-Lewis does in order to immerse himself into his roles. Heath locked himself away for 6 weeks in a hotel room working on the voice for the character and putting together what he called a Joker journal. He drew inspirations from the Stanley Kubrick film A Clockwork Orange, Hyenas, and a dash of Tom Waits, amongst other things. The transformation Ledger had into the Joker for The Dark Knight not only crushed any skepticism that might have existed, but more than 15 years later, it is still some of the greatest acting ever caught on film. Unfortunately, Heath would not get to witness his performance sway the skepticism or experience just how much love he'd received for what he did as the Joker in the film, as it was released July 14th, 2008, just 6 months after his passing on January 8th, 2008. At 28 years old, he was far too young to leave this earth. But what he left behind was a masterpiece. There's a lot of rumors that surrounded his death being somehow associated with his role as the Joker, but his family and friends have repeatedly said the opposite was true. Heath Ledger was an actor who loved what he did, and there is no doubt that he was likely happiest when he was in character on set. About a year and a half after Heath passed away, on the 22nd of May 2009, his final film would be released, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, directed by Terry Gilliam, who previously worked with Ledger on The Brothers Grimm. Due to the project being incomplete at the time of Ledger's death, production was temporarily suspended, but an alternative approach to the project allowed for it to be completed. Johnny Depp, Jude Law, and Colin Farrell portrayed the character Heath originally was playing, capitalizing on the dream sequences of the film to pull this off. Depp, Farrell, and Law all donated their earnings from the film to Ledger's daughter. Not just a kind gesture on their part, but a testament to the type of person Heath Ledger really was. We'll never know what kind of a life Heath Ledger could have had. The trajectory he was on seemed to have a future similar to that of Jake Gyllenhaal, Robert Pattinson, or Joaquin Phoenix. He may have ended up in the next Paul Thomas Anderson, Denis Villeneuve, or Quentin Tarantino movie, likely continuing to work with Christopher Nolan and growing the Masses music label. Or maybe he'd have turned his back on all of it and just ended up a chess grandmaster and director that ended up landing his name alongside Nolan, Denis, and Tarantino. We'll never know what could have been. But fortunately for us, in the ever so short 28 years of life Heath Ledger had with us on this planet, he put every ounce of his being into every creative endeavor he explored. And so, as a result, we have a beautiful body of work from a man who is bigger than the world has room for. Hey, thanks for watching. This video took a lot longer than I expected it to, so if you liked it, it would mean a lot if you left a like and a comment down below letting me know. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you can get updated for videos I'll do in the future. But what I really hope is that seeing Heath Ledger's life laid out like this inspires you to go out and make something. Life is short, and we only have so much time to be creative while we're here. My name is Ian, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.